Welcome, everyone. I'm Paulina, CEO of Spakinect. I'm also a registered nurse. I'm here today with Samara Bell, who is an attorney with Lengea Law, and we are going to talk about what's happening in New York. I know there's been a lot of questions around the recent investigations, the moving the needle report. So we want to give some clarity to everyone about what the investigations are sort of circling around, what they're looking for, how they actually happen. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what does it actually look like when you're being investigated, and what's the outcome of that. So what are the risks there if you are to be investigated? Everybody wants to know what's the worst case scenario. So let's walk through some of these situations, and we would love to have questions. If you guys have a med spa in New York, please, let us know throughout this chat. If you have some questions, we'll answer those live as they come through as well. So let's start today by just giving a really quick overview of what has been happening in New York. And Samara, if you could kind of help just sum up quickly what happened last year.
Yeah, so New York is very interested in med spas right now. It's not coming from the Board of Medicine. It's coming from Department of Health. It's coming from Cosmetology Board, Department of State. Basically, they got together, came out with this big moving the needle report in December, this past December 2025. And they kind of reinforced the guidelines. So they said, here's scope of practice, medical procedures cannot be done by estheticians. MSO setup if you're not a physician or an NP with over 3,600 clinical hours. And they did undercover investigations and they went into over 200 med spas in New York City. And then they listed out some of the violations in the report and kind of reiterated what you need to do to be properly owned, stay in compliance, and who should be doing what.
Okay, so Department of Health, you said, is the one who organized sort of these investigations.
Yeah, that's one of the departments.
One of the departments.
Hmm.
And I want people to understand this is a bit different than your typical investigation that would happen with the nursing board or the medical board, where historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, the boards will investigate all of the complaints that come to them. So if they get complaints about a nurse or a physician, they have the ability or the right to go and investigate those complaints, the duty actually to investigate those complaints for the safety of the public. Now, it sounds like what's happening right now is that New York has put together essentially a joint task force that is no longer just the medical and nursing boards. And this task force does not need complaints to be able to go into a med spa. They've effectively said they're going to target, I don't know the criteria, maybe you can share if you do, but they're targeting med spas in general. So you do not need to have had a complaint filed against you in order to be investigated. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And the moving the needle report was specifically New York City. And so it's New York City and it's a joint enforcement. And it's, part of it, they called it an oversight and investigations division, New York City Council, but it is these groups, you don't have to have a complaint against you. They're just coming in. And then New York State later came out and said, we stand behind these regulations. Here's what happened in New York City. So it's not just, people in New York City who should, be wondering about these. It affects the whole state.
And do we know how they choose which med spas they're going to investigate?
We don't have that information. I mean, it seems just, random. A lot of things are, people have things on their website that can make them targets. If they're listing procedures and they don't have licenses or licensed nurses to do those procedures, they can find you that way. But they, in the report, they just said we went into these places and here's what we found.
Hmm. And what were the most common reasons for people getting violations from these investigations?
Yeah, so there are two buckets really. So one, they found med spas that are not physician owned without MSO structures. And second was they found people who are practicing outside their scope, med spas who are employing estheticians, and these estheticians are doing medical procedures. They actually listed out the procedures that they found some of the people doing. And then the kind of the third piece is a lot of like sanitary things and refrigeration and kind of those, those different things that you should be doing as well.
And so if I'm a med spa and I've been investigated and they've found that I'm in violation of one of these things, let's say my structure is not set up appropriately, what is the actual outcome of that? What's the risk for that med spa? What would happen?
Yeah, so and they have this in the report as well too. And so what can happen is they'll investigate further. They'll can schedule a hearing. At the hearing, they can, evidence is presented. You can be fined. You can lose your license. They have stop orders where they temporarily shut you down, or if it's so egregious, they can shut you down completely.
And that sounds pretty egregious. It sounds like it would be a complete disruption to business. Do we have any idea of what the cost is for a med spa that, gets this type of a violation, in dollars? Like, what does this cost them?
Yeah, I mean it's a range, right? So it's a bit arbitrary depending on,
Mhm.
the violations. I mean, but it can certainly be tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes. Um, okay, so we talked about structure, some estheticians or people who are not medical professionals performing maybe injections, laser. Is there anything that estheticians can do in New York at a med spa?
Cosmetic procedures that are, under their scope, facials, some chemical peels that are lower grade. But the report was really clear, no injectables, no medical kind of stuff, and just,
Mhm.
whatever under your cosmetology license is really only what you should be doing. And I know there are a lot of places out there where estheticians are doing microneedling and,
Mhm.
but they were really clear in the report and they actually listed out all of the procedures that they found people doing that they shouldn't be doing. So they found people
Mm.
doing Botox and fillers. When I say people, I mean estheticians.
So microneedling is not within the scope of an esthetician in New York.
Yeah, so New York has one of the kind of quirkier rules for microneedling. Technically, only physicians, tattoo artists with tattoo licenses, and acupuncturists are.
Hmm.
There's a regulation that says only those three groups are able to do microneedling in New York.
Got it. Okay. And then what about laser? Who can perform laser treatments in New York?
Yeah, so New York, they actually have a pretty clear guideline compared to some other states. It's a little confusing and grayer, but um, New York does have a chart. It's available online, and so there are, depending on the classes, laser hair removal is pretty unregulated in New York. I think maybe I can do laser hair removal. Basically, anyone can do laser hair removal in New York. And then from class two and up, nurses with supervision can do lasers in New York.
Okay, so wow, so anybody, even a non-medical professional can perform laser treatments. Is there a certain credentialing that they need to get, or do they need to work underneath a physician?
So just laser hair removal, though, not
Laser hair removal.
not all laser. No, so estheticians, anyone can do laser hair removal. They don't have to have a collaborating physician to do that.
Okay. And do they require a minimum credentialing or education for that?
No, they don't, which is
Okay.
kind of, I don't know, frightening is the right word. That's why I was joking. I said I could because it's just
Sure.
one area in New York that they're unregulated about.
Do you see that changing in the near future?
It's one of those things. There are, there's been pending legislation in New York. There's been pending legislation to change the microneedling law, and those things, typically take time.
Hmm.
Um, it's been that way for a while with laser hair removal. So, I think as of now, anyone can do it in the med spa.
So what do you think if I'm a med spa in New York, what would you say are the top three things? We talked about structure. What are maybe some other two top things that I need to be acutely aware of and make sure that I have in place to protect myself if I do become the victim of an undercover investigation.
Yeah, you want to have policies, procedures, protocols, and you want to have these readily available. You don't want to be creating new protocols because you're being investigated. So, you want to have these stored electronically. You can get them easily. You want to make sure you have copies of licenses of practitioners. And just kind of, collaborative agreements, you're able to get those easily. And just, making sure you have this paper trail because it's not really enough to just say we're doing everything right. And you
Mhm.
probably are, but we need to see it on the paper too.
Mhm. And do you mean when you say have those documents, do you mean actually have them on paper on site in your practice, or can that be, a digital copy of those documents?
Yeah, so it can be a digital copy. You should have a binder that has emergency protocols. Good to have in a binder, and collaborative agreements should be in a binder as well. But consents can be digitally stored.
Okay. And then as far as collaboration agreements goes, if I am an NP, I think there's a bit of maybe some gray area there where we get questions. If an NP wants to operate a med spa, can they operate their own med spa in New York without a physician?
So, yes and no. So, if the NP has over 3,600 clinical hours, they do not need a physician. They don't need any collaboration. They can just open up a PLLC and start their own business. Less than 3,600 hours, you still need a collaborative agreement with the physician medical director.
And is that going to potentially change, or something was going to change in July potentially?
Yeah, so the expiration on allowing that to happen is expiring July 1st of this year, 2026. So, we're hearing kind of different things are going to extend it. But if it's not extended, then all NPs, regardless of the number of clinical hours, even if over 3,600, would have to have a collaborative physician relationship.
Wow. So if I'm an NP and I have my 3,600 hours and I'm operating my own med spa, how do I make sure that I stay in the know of whether this statute gets extended or not?
Yeah, I mean, and that's, kind of what we do is staying on top of these things and letting clients know that, hey, we're hearing this and this is going to come out and here's the latest because it's such a, ever evolving landscape,
Hmm.
to understand who can own and who can't.
Exactly. Do you have a plan for someone who's an NP run med spa? I'm just starting my own business, probably don't have a lot of capital to spend on legal services, but what kind of services can you provide for someone like this hypothetical NP?
Yeah, so what we do is, we would get you set up with your entity. Really important, you have to have an entity. We never let anyone individually own a practice because then personal assets can be involved.
Mm.
We would, get your paperwork in order. So we want to have your consents, we want to have, protocols in place, and just making sure, from a compliance standpoint, it's once you get set up, then it's just maintaining it. So you don't have to, be redoing these every 2 months or anything. It's good practice once a year to update your documents, but it's I always say it's easier to get you set up from the beginning than to undo the
Mhm.
bad stuff, right? So
Sure.
it's a lot more expensive and time consuming for you to do it that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I think this is going to be really interesting for people who are listening. I would love to walk through the hypothetical situation of this. Let's say I'm an NP, run a med spa. We can use my name. My name's Paulina. Let's hypothetically say I'm an NP. I've got this med spa in New York, and I am a victim of an investigation. There was no complaint filed against me, but this task force has chosen my med spa to investigate. What does it actually look like? Like how does the investigator show up? How do they present themselves? And sort of help us walk through what that actually looks like.
Yeah, so an investigator can show up who's a legitimate investigator who can come in and identify themselves as an investigator, or it can be someone undercover, like we saw in the Moving the Needle report, where they might pose as a patient or just kind of a person inquiring. So, either they're not necessarily coming in with a big badge and, revealing themselves as an investigator.
Hmm. So they can pose as a patient, schedule an appointment with me, and then at what point would they reveal themselves that they're actually an investigator?
Yeah, so if get a feeling or something that something isn't right, then you can, kind of ask more questions to understand the patient. When are you looking to schedule this treatment or something that might
Mhm.
tip you off to this person not being a real investigator. But it depends. They can do a whole intake and then tell you, I'm an investigator, or they can do a whole intake leave, and then that's,
Mhm.
part of what they're putting in their report.
Do they have to disclose that if you ask them? I don't know if anyone would ask straightforward, but do they have to disclose that they are an undercover investigator?
They should disclose that they're an investigator. So one of the things is if someone comes in and they say they're an investigator, it's really important to get a card or contact info from them. You want their name, you want their phone number, you want their email address. So
Okay, that's
yeah,
great for people to know. If you get an investigator who comes to your practice, number one, make sure you get their contact information.
yeah.
Okay. Then what would be step number two?
So two would be contact your attorney because we don't want people to start. I mean, we have people who we handle board investigations as well. So we have people calling us the investigators standing in their office.
Hmm.
And that's okay. We want you to call them. That's fine. But you don't have to start letting them, tear up your files or, give them everything that you have and say, here's all my stuff.
Okay.
You can say to them, I have an attorney. I'm going to contact my attorney. You can ask for their card and said, and you want to cooperate with them and you want to, I know it's really difficult, but you want to remain calm and just, as best as you can. And, say to take their information, the contact information again, and you can tell them, you have the documents and you'll, provide what they're asking for.
Okay, that feels like a really important piece of information for people. I mean, this goes for anywhere, not just New York, but especially if you're in a state like New York or New York City, where you know that they are increasing their investigations. Number one, you want to get contact information, and number two, you do not have to let them rummage through your files. You do not actually have to present them with anything. Am I hearing that correctly? Where if they come in, I can get their contact information and say, I will have my attorney contact you?
Yeah, you can say you'll have the attorney contact you. Yeah, you can, identify yourself as the owner or the person who's the owner of the practice. But yeah, you can absolutely defer to the attorney.
Okay, I think that is a bit of good news for some people because I don't know that everyone understands that. And just, being an RN myself, I think there's a fear, of course, of being investigated. And again, it's not always a bad thing. I do want to talk about that. There's a lot of fear, of course. It's a scary idea to have this undercover investigator coming into your practice. There's a lot of emotion on that. However, as you grow your practice, you will have naturally more exposure. So sometimes it's just a matter of time. And we can kind of talk about what actions the boards have taken from some of these investigations. But I think the most important thing for people to remember is that you do not have to give up all of your information that day. Even if you don't have an attorney, even if you haven't secured one, you can call one that day. You can get your attorney secured and you can tell them you will have your attorney contact them. So I think if you take away anything from today, just remember that you do not have to allow them access to everything just because they stepped foot into your practice.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of actions is the board taking. I think anyone who's listening to this is somebody who wants to be compliant, who cares about being set up properly. I think we can set aside some of the, practices who are, let's call it grossly negligent, right? Where they don't have people with medical licenses at all. I think I really want to focus here on people who are trying to do the best they can and may be living in a little bit of fear right now around what's going to happen. What if I'm the victim of this investigation? So Can you help us understand if, I'm NP Paulina and I'm trying to do everything by the book and then maybe there are some things I'm not doing right, but I don't know. How does the board historically react to those types of practices or medical professionals?
Yeah, the board, when they investigate and, up into the hearing, they look at overall the practice, right? So you're doing 95% of everything correct, and you had this, one or two violations, and they really weigh that heavily in terms of, what the penalty or fine will be for that. If like you said, the people who are, grossly I mean, in the moving the needle report, they had people who had, medication next to staff lunches, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're
Hmm.
talking about people who might not know they're, in compliance. And so one of the big things that they're looking for is getting you up to compliance.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for corrective action. They're not the board seems like this big scary thing because nobody knows and they hear stories and things like that if you don't regularly go before the board. But they this is all starting because there are a number of injuries and complaints, and it's people from med spas who aren't doing what they should, who are maybe ruining it for other people. And now
Mhm.
the state is very interested because of that. And so people, say to me, oh, there are all these new laws in New York, and there aren't new laws. It's just they're enforcing things now. And the
Hmm.
board is just looking to, take corrective action. Now, the extreme would be a stop order. They shut you down, but that's if you're, really have unlicensed people and, maybe you don't even have a medical director. I mean, that's the extreme end.
Right.
For small fines are possible too on the other end of that. And, findings without anything also on the lower end of that too. So,
Hmm.
it is a fact-based thing, but it's,
Hmm.
you have to have a large number of violations to be completely shut down.
That seems in line with what I've seen in other states too. Specifically in California, I have seen that the board, if they see that you're really trying to do everything right,
Yeah.
and that you had a couple of, missteps here or you didn't know that you're supposed to be doing it this way, they typically are not punitive in that instance. They really try to educate. And I appreciate that, especially as a nursing professional myself. But I know that not all states are like that. I know that it also is highly dependent on, who's running the board. It matters, who's the subject matter expert who might be reviewing your case. But I do think that overall, the majority of the time, they try. If they can really see that you're trying to do things by the book, they will likely just do some education with you rather than, kind of come in really heavy-handed. I think they really care about patient and public safety overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, they just want everyone doing what they should. They're not trying to stop medical practices and, shut down people's livelihood. They're just, and they, like you said, they really value people taking the corrective action and bringing themselves up to compliance.
Right. So, how do peptides fall into this? This is a really hot topic right now. People want to know. I get this question all the time. Can I offer peptides? Can I offer injectable, peptides? So, in New York specifically, how are these boards looking at peptides?
Yeah, so a number of states are starting to roll out specific peptide guidance. New York doesn't have a ton of specific state guidance right now, still compliant federally you have to be, but um, one of the things we tell people is the range of peptides. So you have peptides that are for research only. That's going to be your extreme risk. They're not for human use, and using those, we're seeing people getting in trouble for those across the country. Um, if you do have peptides, really important, you have to have peptide specific consents to that type of peptide, not just peptide consent. We want to see, whatever the name of the peptide is that you're using.
Mhm.
And we want to, if it's, for non-FDA approved peptides, we want to see that language in the consent so patients understand this is, what they're getting. And obviously, like a regular consent, all of the risks in there as well.
And where is the safest place for me to source peptides if I am going to be administering them in my practice?
Yeah, so I mean, we, don't want anything we don't know about from overseas that just comes in the mail. Or someone
Yeah.
asked me the other day about product from Temu. We don't want to see that. And so definitely a no. Larger pharmacies that kind of have more to answer to are safer generally, because they have more patients and they're, more likely to be doing the right thing, and we can trace the, channel of command. Just kind of a small pharmacy on the corner, and you're the only peptide client, not as safe
Mhm.
as, definitely higher risk than from a larger pharmacy.
Right, absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of advertisements. I'm sure, everybody else in this industry is. I go on LinkedIn or Instagram and I get advertisements asking if I want to buy peptides from who knows where. So
Right.
I think it's really important for people to understand, okay, maybe I've taken some training and my physician that I collaborate with is comfortable with, with me administering peptides. And so where can I source them? That's going to be the safest bet for me, given that this is a gray area, a regulatory gray area, which I really hate. And
Yeah.
it's kind of just waiting for people to come out, for states to come out with a more explicit regulation. But until then, I think we want to always operate up to the standard of care, and if we want to have a defensible stance, we have to be able to show that we are operating up to that standard of care. So just for everyone to kind of understand that the gray areas become tricky, and just because some people are doing it and getting away with it is not good reason to do it yourself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on specifically from this report and the recent investigations that you think would be really helpful for a med spa to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is, part of the report too is, they're in conjunction with it. They're people aren't doing good faith exams for medical procedures. And
Hmm.
so, people are just signing a standing order and off we go. And so it's really important, I mean, can't stress it enough, before every medical procedure, and then patient specific orders we want to see too, not just a
Yes.
very general order. Really important to see those patient specific orders. And then you can delegate to your RN or whoever is performing that procedure.
And so, what is the difference between a standing order and a patient-specific order?
Yeah, so patient-specific order, we want to see the procedure they're getting. We want to see, how many vials or units or whatever it is. And, if someone's getting three different procedures, that's okay too. We can have one order for one person, but we can't just do Botox and then in the future they get different procedures, but there's no order for that. We can't just
Mm,
say aesthetic treatment is, that
hmm.
would be a general order.
Hmm. Okay. So we need to have every patient needs to have a good faith exam if the person administering the treatment is not a prescriber themselves. So if I'm an RN and I'm doing some treatments on a patient, I need to make sure that I have a good faith exam for that patient and I have an order to treat that patient just as I would in the hospital or any other outpatient medical setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And when it comes to the orders for aesthetics, I think there is some gray area there too. When it comes to specific orders, um, how does the board interpret ranges? If have my patient had a good faith exam and now I have an order to give them up to 30 units of Botox in their frontalis, is that allowed, or do we need to have specific units for each patient?
Yeah, ranges are generally fine. Ranges, there are, not much issue. More so when it just says Botox, right? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
because the issue is the patient has some kind of injury and they say, oh, you told me I was only getting this amount. And we go back and we have no record because there's no range in there. And so,
Mm-hmm.
whereas if the patient gets an injury, you go back and say it was in the range that we talked
Mm-hmm.
about. Here it is in this written order. We can
I think that's
clean
so
up that
important.
negligence piece.
It feels really important for RNs specifically to know that, because we're taught that ad nauseum in the hospitals that we need an order for everything. We've got to call the doc in the middle of the night to get orders for things, and I think in aesthetics, that mentality is evolving. Now people do see it as medicine, but I do think there is still some gray here where, you know, RNs may be practicing out of their scope and not even realize it. And
Mhm.
so if you are an RN operating in any state, not just New York, let's be clear, any state, you do need a patient-specific order to treat. So if you have your patient get a good faith exam, and it comes back saying this patient is approved for Botox, that's actually not an order.
Mm.
And I want people to really understand the difference between just having an approval or a clearance for something versus having an order. And I don't think that as many people understand that as they should.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because a lot of times we have people and they say, well, we have a medical director, so we're good,
Mhm.
and it's great. We want you to have a medical director, but it's that next step too, and having that
Yes.
paper trail with the specific order.
Right, exactly. Okay. So, good faith exams, make sure you have a patient-specific order for every treatment that you're administering and any future treatments. So, like you said, if that patient comes in for Botox one time and I had an order for Botox, um, do I need to then have a new good faith exam done if the patient comes back in 3 months to get Botox?
So, not necessarily for Botox, again, for a procedure that's new to the patient, if there's been a change in medical history, or if the patient's getting a different range of Botox, and you would
Okay.
need a new exam for that.
And typically, how long would you say an order for Botox is good for?
1 year. I mean, 1 year would be like to see a new one in a year.
Okay, so that's best practice.
Mhm.
Have a new one done once a year.
Yeah, and same thing though, unless there's, change in history or something else happening.
Right, exactly. Well, before we continue, I'd love to know if there are any questions from those of you who are here live, and we would love to answer any questions that you have about what's happening in New York. How can you keep yourself safe? I do have a raised hand here. Yes, Jim, I will allow you to talk.
Hi. I didn't know I could ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, great. Thank you. This is a great seminar. Thank you for having it. I had two questions. One, we're pretty clear about the rules around microneedling. What's your point of view on microchanneling, specifically the ProCell treatment?
Yeah, I mean it's a bit similar in terms of guidelines, but in terms of enforcement and what we've seen with the guidance and all that, they're just saying microneedling. They're
Right.
just using that term microneedling here, so you can't do it. So I think it's grayer for microchanneling.
Right. So you're obviously familiar with it then. Great.
Mhm.
Second question surrounds hydrofacial's lymphatic service. And I'm not referring to the lymphatic drainage that's done as part of the core hydrofacial treatment, but there's a number of spas out there, particularly in New York, that are now talking about the hydrofacial body treatment. There's a specific handpiece, I believe, that goes with it to do body work. Um, we've had the debate in our center around can the estheticians do that or not? They obviously
Mm.
do hydrofacial, but this appears to be another gray area.
Yeah, I think it's gray. I think it's a bit risky with all of the, enforcement lately. Um, but I'm not aware of anything specifically about, this type of therapy.
Okay, so it's obviously different than lymphatic massage, where
Right.
my massage therapist handle that.
Yeah.
Mm.
This was more specific to the hydrofacial device.
Yeah. I
Okay,
mean, not aware specifically. I mean, I haven't seen anything where they said nobody, you can't do this in this
right.
specific treatment, which, I think you can make a case it's a medical treatment, but it's gray.
Okay. You were going to say something, Paulina?
I was going to say that that's a non-invasive treatment, right? We're not piercing the skin for that.
Correct.
Yeah. It
It's
is
it's
so tough when these new treatments come out like this because the regulation hasn't had a chance to catch up. And so I do feel like it's a gray area, and it may be an instance where obviously you care about making sure that you're doing things right. And, I would probably say that if you had estheticians doing that, and Samara can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you could show a paper trail as to why, you feel like that was in their scope and they investigated you, I think probably it would just be an education of, okay, we don't, the cosmetology board doesn't feel like this is within their scope, and then you can, course correct at that time. But I don't know that it would be super punitive.
Yeah,
Got it.
I agree. I mean, some of these things it's hard for anyone to figure out, and so for the board to say, "Hey, you can't do this," it's, show me where you told me this, right? It's one of
Hmm.
those things.
I mean,
Hmm.
the lymphatic aspect of the core hydrofacial service is cleared, correct?
Yes.
Right. So
Mhm.
my view was in our dialogues in the spa was, well, what's the difference if you're doing the drainage on someone's face or neck, or if you're doing it on their arms or body or
Hmm.
or legs?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think another thing to consider, Jim, is do those providers, whether they're estheticians or not, do they have training, to operate that device? I think that's another thing that regulators really look for.
Right.
And again, you just, as long as you have that documentation to show, look, we've had these discussions. Here's how we came to this determination. They've all been trained on it. I feel like you would be in a really a good place, especially with these new treatments where there literally is no explanation from any sort of regulatory board about who can do what. They just simply cannot catch up at the rate that we're getting new treatments. So I think with anything, whether it's the hydrofacial, lymphatic, or anything else, if you can just show a paper trail and show that you did your due diligence, I think you'll be in a good place if you were to be investigated.
Right. The hydrofacial is probably our core service at our center. So we've certainly been through all the training
Hmm.
requirements and do consistent refreshes on that as well. So
Good. Well, I'm so glad that you asked that question. I think it's helpful for a lot of people
thank
listening.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Amber's here. If you're here, Amber, I'd love to hear if you have any experience with some of the things that we've been talking about. I know you focus heavily on compliance with your clients as well. And if anybody has any questions, please let us know. Other than that, I'll give it a minute or so. If not, we can wrap up here. Oh, Amber, let's see. Hi, Amber.
Hey, Paulina, how are you?
Good. Thank you for jumping in.
Yes, yes. Um,
Well,
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
can you hear me? Sorry.
We can hear
Did I have
you.
mute or mute? Am I
We
good?
got you. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you for doing this because we've seen an influx of clients from New York because of everything that is going on in there. And so I just wanted to get on here. We have our own legal counsel, but I wanted to get on here just to make sure because everything, like we were just talking about is, in those gray areas and things like that. It's always good to get different perspectives. So, I've been asked some of the same questions that came up today. So I think that, this was great and I would love to see more because I think it's very much needed, but that's my 2 cents. I don't really have
Perfect.
anything specific from, working with clients, but yeah, just lots of more movement.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions that you get? Obviously, we have resources that we can help with clients with questions, especially around New York. We are seeing a lot of phone calls right now from our clients in New York wanting to make sure that they're doing everything by the book. So I think
Yes.
for me, the one thing I really want people to take away from this today is again, if you are doing your due diligence and you can show that you have a paper trail, I think you'll be in a really good spot. I don't want people living in fear all the time. That's not good either. So, the best thing you can do is one, make sure you have an attorney who's reviewed all of your documents, all of your agreements, your corporate structure. And two, if you're investigated, to make sure that you get the contact information of that investigator and you don't have to let them into your practice and give them any documentation that day. I think those are some really key takeaways from today. So I really appreciate you, Samara, coming on and giving us your context, your insight. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful. And everyone, just remember that you are in good hands if you go with a firm like Lengea Law. They will protect you. If you have good faith exams, make sure you're using a provider like Spakinect or a verified NP who's able to prescribe and issue those good faith exams. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you guys next time.